Varieties of History and New Trends. We're going to look over 40 years of historiographical developments from the 1970s to the present, and it's going to be a fast look, but these are just some images of the 70s, images that actually were very part of my formative years of growing up. And I think it's always very strange to think about when your era becomes a historical era and how people look at it. And so that leads me to this question that I ask myself a lot, and I ask my friends and my family quite a bit of what do they think, what do I think historians will make of our world in 50 years? How will they organize what has happened? How will they make sense of it? How will they make sense of it? How will they order it in 100 years? What kind of questions will they be asking? What kind of sources will they be particularly interested in? And what kind of sources will be available? And so that gets us back to that big question of change and continuity. And also to think about the change in continuity in the past 50 years. And it's surprising how much can change in 50 years. It's also perhaps not surprising how much can stay the same. And then consider in the last 100 years the change in continuity. Well, from the 1970s on, we have entered an age that goes through all sorts of names, but it's marked by the idea of computers, digitization, and information. And we've looked at the idea of the digital age and the information age for history and its implications. And of course, the role of the computer in our lives has taken such a for granted position. It's become such an extension of ourselves and our identities. I think for many people, it's hard to imagine what the world would be like without our iPhones, our laptops. And so technology has played an incredible role in how we view the world around us and how we are able to tap into this world, how we look at history. So think about what impacted these ages, the computer, digital, information age, has had on the study of history, both as an object and a subject. And I find the role of technology fascinating on what it does to society and how society uses it in terms of its disciplines. And I think about what will be some of the big developments that will become far more pronounced in the next 50 years. And I think probably we'll see drones, simulations, more miniatures of computers. So, the kind of computer power you had in the 1970s, which is now far exceeded in the iPhone. What will that computerization, that digitization look like? And of course, the whole role of three-dimensional printing and scanning. I think we're at this edge of 3D printing and scanning and downloading and uploading and symbolizations, and so I don't know. But I find it very interesting and fascinating to think about. So let's get the 70s onwards. There's a sea change in the historical profession. That was noted in Arnold's work and also the readings you have done throughout this semester. And the dramatic sea change, in essence, is that social history comes into its own and transforms historical inquiry. And we're going to return to this again because it's just a very important aspect to really understand in terms of historiography. And I want to look at specific case studies and themes to consider this transformation and what it suggests about society, the historical profession, and the historian, because they're all intertwined. The historian is part of a society, and it's also, the historian is part of a professional discipline. And to take a step back and really think about what it means to be a historian and part of this profession and discipline. And again, return to the American Historical Association's statement on standards of professional conduct. I think this is an excellent starting point to think what it means to be a historian and what historians share as a sort of professional identity. There are abundant professional resources and student discounts to look at the AHA website, thehistorians.org. And if you are interested in any of these professional historical organizations, they offer excellent student discounts, so I urge you to take advantage of these. So, for example, check out historians.org, the big AHA website, and you can really see what historians do. Spend some time going around checking out this website. Look at the AHA annual meeting and look at what kind of panels are being offered, what kind of papers are being presented. And the annual conferences are an excellent way to find out what the current trends and what are the new approaches that are now this year, the hot things. So check it out. Those people that are interested in American history particularly are members of the Organization of American Historians, the OAH. So also check out oah.org if you're interested in American history, or even just if you're interested in history, because it has wonderful resources on scholarship and teaching that's not just about American history. There's also an annual conference on American history. Check that out to see what the current trends and approaches are for the historians that focus on American history. There's also the World History Association that has conferences and is devoted then to really try to get world history at the forefront of our understanding, a global history, so that we go beyond a national approach to a more global approach. And this has been also a really important aspect of the last 40 years. An organization that I've been a long-time member of, because my area of interest is Russian history, is the Association for Slavic, East European, and Eurasian Studies. And it's not just for historians, it's for Slavicists in general. And it also has great resources if you're interested in that. And there's many, many more. So just see what kind of history association appeals to you and maybe join it. And I think that you'll find out any of these communities are based on collaboration and respect and toleration. And this is a key aspect, I think, of the historical profession, is collaboration, respect, and toleration, and honesty. History is very much a reflection of society, of what interests historians and what they study. It's a reflection of social values, interests, attitudes, and priorities. And you could say this probably for any humanities really is a reflection of society and its values and interests and concerns. Political history, as we have seen, is a very male-centered history. It's a political history that focuses on great achievements or maybe great failures to learn from. It focuses on religion and politics and war, and through this lens it looks at great men in history to be able to offer a sort of moralistic story of the past, of what we can learn from the past so that we don't repeat the past, even though the history can never be repeated. History does not repeat itself. But the political history, it's wonderful history. Usually it is very well written, but it's a very traditional rendering of history, a very strong narrative of history, and it tells a great tale. And I think that ultimately history tells a good story, and Arnold was very emphatic about that. But in the 20th century, there was this sea change. The 20th century was a very contradictory century. It was both the age of democracy, of mass politics, and also authoritarianism. And coming out of the sort of the true test of democracy versus authoritarianism, post-World War II, Cold War society then begins to challenge much of what had been accepted as the traditional narrative before World War II. And there becomes increasingly very successful social movements challenging the stronghold of past politics, and new visibility, new voices then argue that they deserve their time now. They deserve to be seen and heard. This has been sort of summed up in the term identity politics, in a way that it's about people discovering their identities, discovering the value of their identities, and making those identities visible and heard, which is sort of a challenge to the status quo of the traditional status quo society. And these successful social movements then begin to organize to change discriminatory laws, begin to make the society more equal, more fair, more just. So this is an age of civil rights. And with this, the new histories to be written based on these 1970s movements. And I won't go into any great detail about this, but you can see that a whole host, and there's many more that I couldn't add on to this slide, but the Black Power movement, the American Indian movement, the gay rights movement, the women's liberation movement, the ecology movement, all helped to give this sort of social, cultural push. And social historians then, they also began to research, whoops, my cat just stepped on the computer, began to add their voices to asking questions about what it means to be a Black American, or the issue of gay rights movements and equal access. The women's liberation movement, as you can see, was really took off. And this was also all done in a time of political failure, military failure, with Watergate and the Vietnam War, national humiliations, and a time of economic stagnation. So I think what's important, here we get to the slide that the cat already introduced, is looking at different case studies of finding one's history and what this means. So in your readings, consider sort of this idea of becoming visible, the escape from Thucydides' tower through social history. Sometimes is what has been called historical revisionism, of rewriting the past to include new voices, new approaches, new trends, new ways of looking at things. And I think women in history is a particularly good case study to look at. You can see the growth in the 1970s in the United States and the Western Europe of women's history. Certainly the example of the Soviet Union, post-Soviet Union, offers a different look. And it also does in terms of Asia and China. There's questions of what it should even be called, and should it be feminist? What about gender? How to even approach gender in women's history? So I think it's a good example of looking at new themes and new research topics. Increasingly, in the 21st century, there's been a move away from the national focus on women's history to look at globalization and migration issues. So there's new themes, interests emerge. Social history then is from the bottom up. And because it's from the bottom up, it particularly has been connected with liberation movements and liberating history from the tower. And as you've seen from your readings, it's interested in private life, emotional space, family, children, sexuality, class. Questions that are posed on trying to uncover more of the past. And I've offered some slides here that you can go and look at, and you can also go online to look at the data of the history profession. Again, this is on historians.org, of what kind of history topics have increased from 1975 to 2015. So this is a very apt graph to look at what has happened. And as you can see then, what has taken off and what has begun to just level off. Environmental history has made a big growth spurt in the 21st century. You can see the decline. You can also see the terms of specialization of again, this emphasis on world history, and its growth certainly has taken off. But the United States and in the U.S. has certainly remained in the primal place. The status of women in the field of history, and women as a proportion of new history PhDs conferred, as you can see, has taken off. So check out Historians. It's a great community. Think about the role of archives, particularly in the digital age, the information age. Think about the publications and what they write. Look at the conferences. Consider the role of how historians help in creating documentaries and exhibits in public history, and so much more. So I encourage you to look at the data on this history profession. Go to historians.org to see more on this field and think about, again, the new directions, innovative approaches, and think about what is new and what will become new down the road.